issues, and we can bring experienced professionals and advocacy strategies to the table to work for you as landowners. So we work on things such as wastewater, fair property issue, eminent domain, and then oil and pipeline routing, and of course this pipeline being one of our top priorities. But enough about us. I want to introduce to you your lineup for tonight and who you're going to hear from. We're going to start with opening remarks from Commissioner Weir. Then we're going to hear from Chuck Lesniak, who's an environmental and pipeline safety professional, about general safety and risk assessment related to the pipeline. Then we'll hear from Matt Walsh, who's actually a landowner who's dealt with Kinder Morgan in the past. He's going to talk about his experiences working with Kinder Morgan and what's happened on his property. After that, we'll hear from Matt Lara with the Hill Country Alliance to talk about impacts to the Hill Country and the surrounding areas that this pipeline may have. And we will also hear from Kay Pence, a landowner in Gillespie County, who will give you her take on this pipeline. And we'll do a Q&A moderated by me, and where you'll be able to get some questions out to those of the speakers that you've heard tonight, in particular Chuck Lesniak, Matt Lara, and then also Ron Fuselier, the Groundwater Conservation District representative that's here tonight. So with that, I'd like to welcome Tommy Weir up to the stand, up there, for some opening comments.
Hello. I appreciate y'all inviting me out here. Like right here? I appreciate you inviting me out here, and I wanted to come out as a resident of Blanco, and I'm the commissioner for Precinct 1, which is 281 West out towards Albert, Brushy Top down to Indian Hills, that area right there. The pipeline is coming through that area, and I wanted to speak as my opinion only. I'm not speaking for the county. There's 3 other commissioners and a judge, and I just wanted to let you know where I stand and how I feel about it. And I've got constituents on both sides of this issue. I've got some that are looking forward to the pipeline coming through. They have a chance financially to gain from it. They've got the ability, if this works for them, they can tenant their property, build roads, do whatever they might do, you know. And then I've got the other side of it, where people have the pipeline coming through basically their front yard, taking down oak trees in the yard, and this and that. So I represent both sides of this issue. So where my stand is on it is I owe both sides an open rapport, and I feel like I need to keep a dialogue with Kinder Morgan of some sort. And I'm afraid that if I sign the resolution, what's going to happen there is the light switch is going to go off. The phone's going to hang up, and we're going to lose the dialogue that I need to represent the people that are happy with this thing coming through, or accepted the fact that if it is, they're going to make sure that it works for them. The other side of it, I represent the people that are dead set against it, and I hear from y'all on a daily basis. I understand your concerns. You email me, you call me everywhere we meet. This is a hot topic, and it should be. But I also know that this is the process. It takes more meetings, and we just need to stay informed. And I'd like to see and have talked to representatives of Kinder Morgan and ask them that the last meeting that we had up here, that my constituents weren't happy with it at all. The reason was that they felt like they didn't have a chance to stand up in front of Kinder Morgan and ask questions or give their opinion, whatever it might be. The format, the way it was laid out, they just came into the room and kind of spread out in one-on-one. So a lot of them were unhappy with it. I was reassured that they will have another town hall meeting and allow that to happen. Allow all the stand up and tell us about it. If they're against it, tell us why. Just like y'all are going to do tonight, they need to air it out with Kinder Morgan. I think they should have the opportunity to either verify those facts or refute them. And that's it. Again, that's part of the process. So that's where I stand on it. I'm hoping that the county, as far as the county's concerned, could be the conduit to keep the conversation going, because I'm afraid that if you shut that off, then when y'all come, anybody that comes to me and says, what's going on, I want to have the ability to go out to the right of way. I wouldn't mind having the ability to be able to go back to someone that's for it and go, well, here's where they're at, here's what's going on. If they're against it, here's what they're doing, and here's what maybe we need to do about it. But we've got to keep that open conversation. And they can't just shut you off, go through this job, nobody knows what's going on. Somebody has to be there. And I feel like that's my personal opinion, that the county needs to keep that. I need to be able to answer your questions when you call me. And if I can't, I'll go find the answer and bring it back to you. But, so there's where I'm at. And as far as signing the resolution, I've had people come up to me and say, you need to sign it. And I don't want to sign it if I don't feel good about signing it like other people have, because they just wash their hands from it and go, I signed it, walk away from it. Now I don't have any political pressure on it. I don't believe in that. I believe in the fact that we need to work it out. If they're going to be stopped, go through this deal, let's do it right. But let's have communication going and not shut it off. And that's what we're doing. That's the reason why I'm a little reluctant to sign any kind of resolution. Now, I'm not speaking for the others. The other commissioners and the judge. They might come up with it, and if they do, we'll have a vote on it. But as far as I know, we're the only one, in my mind, the county, that can keep that open dialogue going, where we can communicate back and forth between the constituents and Kinder Morgan. Yes, ma'am.
In Kinder Morgan, in the ad that they've been running in the Blanco newspaper,
Yes,
Kinder
ma'am.
Morgan in the ad that they've been running in the Blanco newspaper, they're claiming that it's going to benefit the Blanco County by $900,000 in tax dollars. Do you know where that estimate comes from?
No, ma'am, I don't. I know in the form that they had here before, they had other counties around it listed and how many miles. I don't know how you come up with that basis, whether it's so much a mile or whatever. That's a question I think we ought to have in an open town hall with Kinder Morgan, where you can ask that question and they can say, here's how we came here. You know, and with that said, I'm speaking for myself, but I am a county member. But when it comes to that $800,000 or $900,000 or whatever that number might be, people look at that and go, well, the county gets that money and that's why they're interested in this thing going through. But every taxing entity gets part of that $800,000 or whatever it might be. That includes the emergency service districts, north and south, 2 school districts, the county, the sheriff's department, and that takes care of indigent care. It takes care of child advocacy, ESD. It takes care of if let's say ESD gets $100,000 or $200,000 that money each entity. Well, then they can use that for EMTs or whatever. I guess whatever they decide to use it. So in my mind, a lot of folks think that goes straight into the general fund of the county, and it doesn't. What it does is it goes to each taxing entity, and I don't even know how they break that, if it's proportionate or how it works. So we've never had that conversation with Kinder Morgan that I know of. They've been to Commissioner's Court twice and visited with us twice. And they have actually come to our office and visited with us. And that's where I brought up the fact that you need to talk to these people have this public forum where they can stand up like y'all are doing tonight, ask the questions, and you can answer it at that point in time. And that's where I feel like, yes, sir.
You know, you're the first person I've heard that had anybody who's in favor of the pipeline. I talked to 200 people around here. I'm sure that everyone I talked to is against it. I'm interested that you think it's split between pros and cons.
I don't know if it's split even. I just know that I've had people that are saying it. The line's coming, and I'm gonna make sure that I negotiate and get it done. And you know what? I tell them, don't do it yourself. If you're gonna do it, try to get some help, some people that know what they're doing to help you with it. If you're gonna do it. You know, make sure that you get whatever. Don't take the first offer or whatever. You know, I mean, most of these people are my friends. I went to school here. I was raised here. I have as many concerns about this as anybody else. But what I want to do is I would like to, in my mind, I can see the county being the person that can answer questions back and forth and carry them to any of my constituents or the county as a whole.
But it's important, 90% of people are against it, 10% are for it. I mean,
I don't know what that is, so I really don't know the number. Yeah. But you know, there's a lot of, if folks are for it, they're not the kind that are going to come out and say something about it. They're just not. They're not. And if they're against it, they're going to be very verbal. I mean, like we are tonight here. You know, you're going to stand up, you're going to say something about it. Well, sure. I didn't know that I was doing the questions.
Okay, great.
Can we do that later? Sure. Yeah, I'll be glad to stand up and answer any other questions. I do want you to understand that I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the county right now because each guy has his own constituents, and I want to make sure that if we do something, county basis, we're going to do it as a whole. So that's my opinion, and I wanted to tell you that tonight.
All right, thank you very much, Commissioner Weir, and for all of you with questions, we're going to do a thorough question and answer session at the end of the meeting, so hopefully you all can stick around and get your questions answered. That would be great. So now we're going to hear from Chuck Lesniak about safety and risk assessment related to the pipeline.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Lesniak. I'm a semi-retired, it says on the agenda, environmental and pipeline safety professional. I worked for the City of Austin in the Watershed Protection Department for nearly 30 years. Spent the last 6 or 8 years as the city's environmental officer, and have been involved in pipeline safety issues since 1999 at a local level, in Austin and also at federal level. I've helped develop a number of pipeline safety policies that have for best practices for how pipelines and communities ought to work together. And I've also, I'm currently on a technical advisory committee for the U.S. Department of Transportation as an appointee of the Secretary of Transportation that reviews and approves new pipeline safety regulations before they are adopted. I am not a pipeline technical professional. I'm a policy and regulatory guy, and I know more than probably most, but not as much as some. So with that, that's kind of who I am and my background. So I'm going to start off with just an overview of the pipeline so that everybody kind of understands the basics about this particular pipeline. It's a 42-inch diameter pipeline, which is a pipe about this big around. If it was sitting here next to me, it'd probably be right in about here. It's 430 miles long from the Permian Basin down to near Houston. It'll feed lines going to the Corpus Christi area and the Houston area. They plan to it's going to cost about $2 billion, according to Kinder Morgan. They plan to transport about 2 billion cubic feet of natural gas per day. This will be a high-pressure, large volume pipeline. The construction easement is proposed to be about 125 feet wide. I'm going to show you a picture of what construction looks like on a pipeline here in just a minute. The permanent easement will be 50 feet wide, which is kind of typical in the industry. I've seen them as narrow as 20 to 25 feet, and I've seen permanent easements as wide as 75 feet. They plan to start construction this coming fall and in service late 2020. And most of this gas will most likely be for export. This will not be used in the United States. The United States is developing a very large export market for natural gas. I've heard that a fair amount of this natural gas will be sent to Mexico, but most of it will not be used in the United States. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention is, I left out at the beginning, I am not anti-pipeline. I'm pro oil and gas in the ground, but that's not a reality right now. I think it is going to be a reality in the next 20 to 30 years. I think in 20 to 30 years, this pipeline will be unnecessary, maybe even sooner. And I hope that time comes sooner rather than later. But right now, the reality is that we've got to have pipelines to meet a market demand, and they're going to get built somewhere. My concern is that the pipelines that get built are built safely and as safely as possible in an appropriate location. So to me, that's the question here. Is this pipeline being put in an appropriate location? Most of y'all have probably seen this. This is the proposed route through Blanco County. It goes just north of the town of Blanco. This is one of my major concerns. I think this is way too close to the town of Blanco. This is a growing community and pipeline operators will tell you, pipeline engineers will tell you, their maintenance people will tell you, they hate pipelines that are in and near heavily developed areas. It makes them hard to operate and they have serious safety concerns. So I'm going to talk a little bit about regulations. This is an intrastate pipeline, which means it begins and ends inside the state of Texas, which means federal regulations don't apply. Only the state of Texas regulations apply. As an intrastate pipeline, the state legislature has exempted most oil and gas operations from most environmental regulations in the state of Texas, particularly pipelines. There are no siting regulations for pipelines in the state of Texas. There is no process associated with it. That's why there's no mandatory public hearing. You won't see a process like they have for a big electric utility line where it takes years and you go through a lot of public meetings and there's a lot of public input and feedback and there's an agency that oversees it and reviews all the documents and makes sure it's put in the right place in the right way. That doesn't happen with pipelines inside Texas. There's no oversight in who is a public utility and who can have eminent domain authority. Texas has some of the loosest and most lax in eminent domain regulations in the United States. You go and you fill out a one-page piece of paper. It's called a T.R.E.A.D. You file it with the Texas Railroad Commission. They accept it and make sure all the boxes are filled in, but they do not review it and approve it. Nobody reviews it and approves it. As I mentioned, there is no public process in Texas for new pipelines. In a federally regulated pipeline, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, has a very robust, many say flawed, process for siting new pipelines, but at least they have a process. The public does have a voice and a required voice, and there is an agency that reviews those pipeline locations. There is no analogous process in the state of Texas. They will have to comply with design and specifications, operating requirements. The state of Texas adopts most of the federal regulations when they're put in place. When I first got involved in the late 90s in pipeline regulations, I was involved in a lawsuit with a pipeline that was being repurposed in the city of Austin, and I was asked to work on that as an environmental person. And so the first thing I thought was, well, I'll go look at the federal pipeline regulations. They've got to be really robust, you know, and this was a federally regulated pipeline. Because I'd been involved with hazardous waste and hazardous materials, that kind of thing, for a long time. And those you could fill multiple bookshelves with regulations that apply to the hazardous waste industry. So I went and I thought, well, this is going to take a month or two, so I better get busy. Well, it was about 10 pages long, and that was it. It's gotten better since then. Under the Bush administration and under the Obama administration, there were two Pipeline Safety Act reauthorizations that were put in place that significantly improved the regulations, particularly in the liquids industry, in the hazardous liquids industry. In natural gas, there are some very significant regulations that are laying on the desk of the administration to be adopted. The industry is asking for these to be adopted, and they're just laying there. And so what we have is a regulatory framework and for safety for natural gas pipelines and hazardous liquids pipelines, in my opinion, that is inadequate to protect people and the environment. So I said I'd tell you what a construction, 125-foot wide construction looks like. This is what it looks like. They'll come in and they'll clear cut the land. Then they'll start grading it. They're supposed to take the topsoil and set it aside so that they can put the topsoil back. In practice, that rarely happens. And so this is the trench will be about 10 feet deep, probably about 6 to 8 feet wide, and it'll have supposed to have 36 inches of soil over the top of the pipe when they're done. One of the things that concerns me about pipeline construction, because this is one of the things that I do know a lot about, is protection of the environment during construction. I've spent most of my life working on those sort of issues. One of the things that I don't see anywhere in this picture, and one of the things you typically don't see on any pipeline project when they're doing construction, is erosion and sedimentation controls. They just don't do it. Even though they're required by federal and state law, nobody seems to make them do it. This is a pipeline easement this is in North Williamson County. This is a pipeline that was built about 4 years ago. I drive past this on a regular basis. This is the 183 crossing of a crude oil pipeline. You can see that 125-foot wide construction easement. This was taken about 3 weeks ago. You can see how good a job they've done revegetating this property. You see topsoil there. You can see what the land looked like on the other side of the right of way before they got there. This is typical in the pipeline industry. You do have some pipeline operators that are better than others. They run the whole spectrum. There's some really, really horrendous pipeline operators, and there's some that are pretty good, and they do their best, and they do a pretty good job not only constructing their pipelines, but operating their pipelines, and then there's people in between. And right now, we really don't know what Kinder Morgan is going to be, whether they're going to be one of those really horrendous operators, or they're going to be one of the really good ones that goes above and beyond. This is another view of that same right of way. This is what one of the things that I'm concerned about as a pipeline safety advocate, is that to put a pipeline in one of the most rapidly growing areas of the United States, and that this is what this pipeline will look like 20 years from now in some of these counties. Maybe not in Blanco, but maybe in Blanco. Certainly in Hayes and some of the other counties it's going through, Caldwell County. This is my fear. This is not a good situation. Pipeline people will tell you that this is not a good situation. So I looked at a report that came out in December 2018 that did an analysis of nearly 10 years worth of data, about 8 years worth of data of pipeline accidents in the United States. So during that 8 years, there were about 5,500 total incidents. And an incident can be fairly minor. It can be they spill, 50 barrels of oil on the ground, and they have a release of a certain amount of natural gas. Nobody gets hurt, it gets cleaned up, everybody goes home. In the story, 2 huge pipelines where neighborhoods are destroyed, rivers are contaminated, where it takes years and years to clean it up, so that it runs the whole country. 5,500 incidents over 8 years resulted in about 600 injuries, more than 125 fatalities, 800 fires, 300 explosions, $4 billion in damages, and almost 30,000 people who had to be evacuated. In the U.S., on average, a pipeline catches fire every 4 days, explodes every 11 days, injures someone every 5 days, and kills someone every 26 days. Now, those are scary numbers, but when you compare that, if you were transporting the same amount of petroleum by rail or highway, the numbers would be orders of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude worse. So pipelines can be one of the safest ways to transport hydrocarbons, but you need to put them in the right places, in the safest places you can, and you need to think ahead, not what's on the ground today, not who's on the ground today, but who's going to be on the ground 20 years from now. Because pipelines last a really long time. There are pipelines in operation in the United States today that are over 100 years old. Hazardous liquid lines cause most of the number of incidents, but natural gas lines, distribution lines especially, those are the ones inside towns, they cause most of the injuries, deaths, evacuations, fires, and explosions. New pipelines have the highest accident rates, and it's because it's sort of testing them by operating them. And so it's a curve that you put it in service, you have a fairly high accident rate, and then in the middle of its life, after about 8 to 10 years, the accident rate goes way down. You found all the flawed pipe. There was something screwed up when the pipe was made, or incorrect welds, or those kind of things. All that is found in the first 10 years. And so they operate structurally very well for about 30 years. And then after about 30 years or so, your accident rate starts to go up again. So this is natural gas transmission accidents in the United States from over the last 8 years, starting in 2010. I got this data from the Pipeline Safety Trust, which is a national advocacy organization that I'm very involved in. This is that same data, but just in Texas. This is the bigger the circle, the bigger the release. And so this is about 8 years worth of data. You can see we have natural gas transmission accidents on a pretty regular basis in the state of Texas. Which is not surprising. We've got a lot of natural gas transmission pipelines in the state. I'm going to show you some failures. This is a sinkhole where they put a pipeline in karst limestone like we've got here through the hill country. This is a sinkhole that developed around this pipeline right behind these houses. They're lucky that this pipe didn't separate and fail. It does happen. There's a pipeline in Pennsylvania that's going through karst terrain right now that was just installed, where they're having so many problems with sinkholes in the karst terrain that the pipeline's been shut down by the state of Pennsylvania. This is a natural gas pipeline that ruptured in Virginia. This is about 10 years ago, I think. And what happens when a natural gas pipeline ruptures is it's under so much pressure you don't get small leaks.